folks continue to file into the room. It is 7:02, so we will get started. I want to thank everyone for joining us here tonight. My name is Robert Hayes. I'm the Community Outreach Librarian here at the Tewksbury Public Library in Tewksbury, Massachusetts. We're here tonight for a great hour we have planned for you. Dan Morain, I knew I was going to do that. Sorry, Dan. He's the author of the new biography, Kamala's Way, An American Life. He's joining us for a discussion of America's new Vice President, Kamala Harris, and he's joined in conversation tonight by Liz Goodwin, who's the Deputy Bureau Chief for the Boston Globe in Washington, D.C. Before I disappear for the night, I wanted to make a few quick points. First, I'd like to thank everyone behind the scenes for making this event possible. This is a collaboration between a group of North of Boston libraries calling themselves libraries working towards social justice. The libraries that are included are Burlington, Chelmsford, Haverhill, Lawrence, Methuen, North Reading, Tewksbury, and Wilmington. Additionally, I'd like to thank the Newton Free Public Library and the State of Massachusetts Library for also partnering with us for this event. And I'd especially like to thank Wellesley Books for being our bookstore partner once again. And I'd also like to thank Dan's publicist, Brianna, from Simon & Schuster for helping make this event possible. Second, just know that this event is currently being live streamed on the Tewksbury Public Library's Facebook page. Please give it a like and feel free to share the video. This video will also be up on the Town of Tewksbury's YouTube channel tomorrow, and I'll make sure to share the video with all the partnering libraries. Third, you'll all be receiving a feedback survey via email tomorrow morning. Please let us know what you thought of tonight's event and what you'd like to see for future events. Also in the feedback survey will be a link to purchase an autographed copy of Kamala's Way from Wellesley Books. And 10% of each sale will benefit the participating libraries. And then finally, just to set expectations, I anticipate this event lasting approximately an hour. We should go till about 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Liz and Dan will have a discussion where Liz will essentially interview Dan, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. Audience members should type their questions into the Q&A. So again, the questions go into the Q&A. Please don't type questions into the comment box. And then goes without saying, but we're dealing with politics here, and I know we're sort of in a heightened stage here. So just note, please no harassing, please no threats, please no profanity. If anyone violates any of these rules, they'll receive a warning. And if the behavior continues, they're going to be removed from the Zoom webinar, and they have the option of continuing to watch the program on Facebook Live. All right, so let me introduce tonight's moderator, Liz Goodwin. Liz is the Deputy Bureau Chief of the Boston Globe in Washington, covering national politics. She's written from the US-Mexico border about the Trump administration's family separation policy, from the UK on President Trump's influence on country's nationalists, and from the campaign trail over 3 presidential elections. She and her colleagues won the 2020 Toner Prize for Excellence in National Political Reporting for their series on battleground states. Liz grew up in Galveston, Texas, and worked for Yahoo News and the Daily Beast in New York before joining the Globe. And now let me introduce Dan. Dan has covered California policy, politics, and justice-related issues for more than 4 decades, including 27 years at the LA Times and 8 years at the Sacramento Bee, where he was the editorial page editor. All right, so let's all give a big virtual round of applause to Liz and Dan for joining us tonight. And Liz, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you guys for joining this discussion on this snowy Tuesday in Massachusetts. Dan and I are not in Massachusetts, but we've seen the images and it looks intense. So I just finished Kamala's Way, and I learned a lot from it, even though I've been covering her during the primary a little bit. There's nothing like, I feel like, reading the account of a local reporter who's followed someone their whole career, instead of, some of us who catch these figures later on once they're in the national eye. So I thought that was a really neat perspective that you brought. And I was wondering if you could just talk about sort of your first encounter with Kamala Harris as she's kind of rising in California politics, and what your first impression of her was back then, and whether that kind of bore itself out or not.
Well, thanks so much to the library, Tewksbury Library, and you, Liz, for taking this time. I first wrote about Kamala Harris in 1994. I don't think we spoke. Memory fades after all those years, but I certainly didn't quote her in the story. But it was about an appointment that she got from the then Speaker of the California Assembly, Willie Brown. I got to know her a little bit during the 2007-8 presidential campaign. I was part of the team for the LA Times that covered that race, and she stood out because she was the first elected official that I'm aware of, and I think probably the first in California to endorse Senator Obama's presidential campaign. And it was a bold move in California because in 2007 and 8, California was really Hillary Clinton territory, and almost all the politicians here of any note had endorsed Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. So that's where I started to get to know her. And then in 2010, when I was at the SACB and she was running for Attorney General, that's when I started to cover her as individually.
And was there always sort of a sense that she was kind of going places, that she was headed somewhere, like even early on, and why was that?
Well, Liz, you've seen her on the campaign trail, and she can really stand out. She lights up a room when she comes in. She's a very good retail politician, I think. She clearly was in a hurry. She was moving up. I didn't pay that much attention to her as district attorney. I was writing about state politics and some national politics. So her years as district attorney in San Francisco, you pay attention to that because it's a big city, it's an interesting city, and she was an interesting politician. And clearly on the rise. But when she was running for Attorney General in California, there was little doubt, but that this would not be the last time she ran for a statewide office or beyond. It was interesting. It doesn't really matter what I thought. The Republican Party clearly thought that she was somebody to contend with. In the 2010 campaign, Republican super PAC spent in excess of $1 million on an ad ripping candidate Harris. So they knew that she was somebody to contend with. They wanted to stop her before she won. So yeah, without a doubt, she was a person on the ascent.
And in terms of like her relationship to the press, did you get a sense of that and how that changed over her career in California?
Mm-hmm. Well, sure. She when she was a surrogate for Barack Obama in the presidential campaign, she would answer any question you had about Barack Obama and his position. She was very accessible. As a candidate for Attorney General, she was also accessible. As Attorney General, I had access to her. I've never really been an access journalist, so it's not something. We weren't going. We went out to lunch once, but yeah, she was available. In a business and a source reporter sense, she was accessible, and I must say that as a columnist and as an editorial writer, I think I was pretty critical of her. In fact, the Sacramento Bee didn't endorse Harris when she was running for Attorney General. I wrote the editorial, took the lead in writing the editorial that endorsed her opponent. But you know what? She's not, my experience is that she is not thin-skinned when it comes to critical reports. I mean, I remember there was one sort of, I can't remember the exact column that I had written, but something I had written that clearly annoyed her, and she just made a passing reference about it, and then went on. So I don't get the impression that she is thin-skinned. She takes her lumps like all politicians do, but I don't get the impression that she, you know, holds it against you.
Why did you guys endorse the other guy in that race? Do you remember?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, Steve Cooley was the Republican. He was running for. He had been a 3-term district attorney in Los Angeles. He had a really good record. He had made his name as a prosecuting public corruption, of which there was a significant amount in LA County. Still is. And so he, you know, he came across as apolitical. Our impression was that this would be the one office statewide that he ran for. We figured that he would be devoted to being the best attorney general he could be. We were not critical of Kamala Harris. We quite liked Kamala Harris. We liked her positions. In fact, we agreed with her on many of the issues that and disagreed with Cooley on. But we figured one was same-sex marriage. As you may recall, in 2008, California passed Proposition 8 that basically banned same-sex marriage, and Cooley was perfectly fine with defending that initiative in the appellate courts, and Kamala Harris said unequivocally during the campaign that she would not defend it. We as an editorial board agreed with her, but we still endorsed him. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And I thought one of the themes that you brought up a lot about Harris was this kind of charge against her that she can be overly cautious. Mm-hmm. And also maybe sometimes you don't quite know where she stands on issues, which it seemed like it came up more once she was AG, a little bit later in her career. And then obviously as a presidential candidate, I think a lot of us, you know, reporters covering her felt like she, you know, after her big debate moment with Biden saying that he's against desegregation of schools, and then the next day she's kind of not for busing to integrate schools, you know, she would kind of slide around a bit on where she stood, and she would get in trouble for that. And I was wondering if one of the kind of moments you describe in her career is when she took a big stand on the death penalty right after she had gotten elected, and all the blowback she received over that. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about that. And then also if you think that moment might have been sort of this formative thing that made her gun shy later on, which is something I was wondering.
Yeah, well, you know, I actually wonder that too. As you know, Harris, Vice President Harris, and the Biden-Harris campaign did not participate, did not help grant interviews for this book. So you know, that certainly would have been a question that I would ask. But when she was running for San Francisco District Attorney in 2003, she made clear that she opposed the death penalty. She was a moral opponent of the death penalty, would never seek the death sentence, no matter the crime. And so she was sworn in. She won pretty handily in 2003, and sworn in the beginning of 2004, January of 2004. So you know, just 17 years ago. And then in April, there was a horrible murder of a police officer. You know, guy doing his job was murdered in the streets of San Francisco by a fellow with a semi-automatic rifle. and 3 days after the murder, before the officer's funeral, she announced she would not seek the death penalty. In that case, she was sticking with her campaign promise. The funeral arrived. She was in one of the front pews, maybe the front pew. I'm not sure. I wasn't there. And as happens when an officer is killed in the line of duty, police from all over the state came to the cathedral, big cathedral, Catholic cathedral in San Francisco. And Dianne Feinstein was the senator, senior senator from California, stood up at the funeral. She then was a proponent of the death penalty and basically denounced Harris and said that this was a crime that was worthy of capital punishment. And the officers in the audience stood and applauded. And there was Harris sitting there, obviously embarrassed. But she stuck to that position. In fact, she wrote an op-ed that in the San Francisco Chronicle a few days later, in which she said that her decision was final. I mean, she was unequivocal. Now, she took a lot of heat for that. Officers shunned her. She'd walk into the Hall of Justice, DA shared the same building as the police did. And if cops saw her walking down the hall, they'd turn their back on her. So that, it was shunning her. So that was a tough time. You have to think that maybe if she had thought through the politics a little bit differently, she might have waited until after the funeral. At the same time, this was her decision. She made it clear, and that's what she did. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that as California Attorney General, she ran on she ran saying that she opposed the death penalty but would enforce the law. And the law then, as now, is that the death penalty is on the books, although nobody's been executed in California since 2006, and nobody's going to be executed anytime soon. It's a law that's sort of a zombie law in California, although there are almost 700 people on death row in California. Nobody's being executed.
And in terms of her reputation as sort of being careful, does that date more to her attorney general days in your mind versus the district attorney days, the earlier days?
Yeah, well, she certainly did not take stands as attorney general that were on issues that you might have expected a district attorney to take a stand on. For example, there were 2 ballot measures when she was California Attorney General to abolish the death penalty, and one to speed up the death penalty. The one to speed up the death penalty passed. The ones to abolish it failed, not by wide margins, but they failed. And she didn't take positions on them. There was a ballot measure. Let me roll back. In 1994, California passed a uniquely harsh version of a 3-strike sentencing law. So on your third strike, third felony in California, could be minor possession of drugs. It could be shoplifting. You ran the risk of being sentenced to 25 years to life. That was the law that was passed by voters in 1994. In 2012, there was an initiative to roll that back a little bit, to sand some of those harsher edges. And she didn't take a position on that either. So, you could certainly make the case that she ducked issues that were, where voters might have wanted to hear from the district attorney. That said, she took some other stands that were, really quite where she was out there. She was out there on her own.
Like the same-sex marriage stand, or?
Well, I mean, that's certainly one where she did not defend a law that had been passed by voters. But there again, she had made clear in the campaign that she wasn't going to do that. So she was sticking with the campaign promise. No, I'm thinking of the mortgage litigation. This is where she, the Obama administration, and right after she was elected, California was especially hard hit in the mortgage meltdown, the financial crash of 2008. And was still reeling from that in 2011. In fact, you could argue that California's really never gotten fully over the crash. But she takes office in 2011 as Attorney General. The states are negotiating a deal to settle with the banks. The Obama administration was pushing for this, and mind you, she's an ally of Obama. And she dug her heels in, and she wasn't going to go for it. California was going to get what she said were crumbs on the table, and she held out. That's how she met Beau Biden, President Biden's late son. He was Delaware Attorney General. They formed an alliance. They formed a friendship, and they stuck to their guns. And she ended up getting about $20 billion for California, which is, not crumbs on the table. It's a significant chunk of change. So it was a significant change, and she did other things like that. So there were instances where she didn't take stands, but there were other instances where she did. I sort of have rethought a little bit in the course of doing Kamala's Way. I've rethought my use of the word cautious. I mean, she was careful. I'm not sure it's a bad thing if you're a prosecutor, somebody who's got the fate of somebody's, freedom or property liberty in her hands, to be a little bit cautious or careful. So.
Yeah, makes sense. And what chapter of Harris's life do you think was most formative to the person we all see today, if you had to choose?
Oh, it's without a doubt her mom. I mean, you think about this woman. She was 19. She grew up in India. Her father was he was a government official and of a significant station in India. Nonetheless, she had graduated from college at 19, and her passion was to become a scientist, and she couldn't do it there. And so in 1959, 19-year-old kid, girl, comes halfway around the world to University of California at Berkeley. I mean, what a gutsy woman she must have been. She married her husband, father of Kamala Harris and Kamala Harris's sister Maya, who went on to become a professor of economics at Stanford, no small feat. But anyway, her mom became a breast cancer researcher, published or co-published in excess of 100 articles, so of some renown. And her parents split when she was a young girl. Divorce was final in 1972. And it was really her mom who raised Kamala Harris and Maya Harris. I mean, her father had joint custody rights and brought them to Jamaica, and obviously they knew their dad. He was involved, but it was really her mom who was most important to her. And it's interesting. I mean, her mom's from India, her dad from Jamaica, but her mom made clear that she understood that Kamala and Maya Harris would be perceived as Black in the United States, and so she made a point of making sure that they were in touch with the civil rights movement and icons of the civil rights movement. So she was formative, and Kamala and Maya Harris both talk about her mom and their mom in quite reverential tones.
Interesting. Yeah. And her relationship with her father is more complicated, right?
Yeah, it's again one of those questions that I'm sure at some point a biographer will be able to put to Vice President Harris. I wasn't able to. Um, I don't understand what happened. She has described him as a good guy, but that they're just not close. Now, he has written about them, and there are photos of her visiting his family, his side of the family in Jamaica. So she obviously had connections to Jamaica. She understands that that's part of her life, part of her heritage. Um, but you get sorry about that.
No worries.
You get uh, the um, uh, the notion that she is yeah, it is clear. There's a biography of her on the California Secretary's or California Attorney General's website that where she describes herself, and she talks about her mother, and she doesn't even mention her father. So it is clearly the case that they are not particularly close.
And since we're on like the personal life section for a minute, would you say that Vice President Harris is sort of like unusually private about her personal life, or is it kind of a normal amount for a politician? What's your experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, my impression, again, I've never tried to be an access journalist, so I've never, I never had this long conversation with her about her life and upbringing and private life. But I can tell you from all the reporting I've done and all the reading I've done about her, and I've done a lot, that there are aspects of her life that are just off limits. People do not know significant parts of her. Of her private life, and it's her right. I mean, her stands are public. We know who her campaign contributors are. We know what her financial holdings are. We know all that stuff that she has to disclose, that she does disclose, willingly discloses, for the most, about her public life. But no, we don't. I mean, I was, I was covering her run for Attorney General. I had no idea that her mom had died, earlier in the campaign. I mean, there are just aspects of her life that she just doesn't talk about. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because I sort of compare that to Obama, where there's like a very candid memoir. We know like so much about his personal life, like the whole dating story with Michelle, and even people he dated before. But I guess that's, maybe Obama is more unusual than Harris in that sense, like the amount of access we have.
Well, yeah, I think that's true. And he's also, a very elegant writer. Her biography, her autobiography is I mean, I read it. I certainly quote from it in the biography I've done. But it's it's kind of it doesn't tell you a lot. Doesn't tell you
a lot of those political autobiographies don't seem to tell you too much. Right. I've had to read too many of them.
Right.
And then you wrote in this book that Harris could be tough, often too tough with those around her. But that you also encountered stories where she really went out of her way to be kind when no one was watching, and when it didn't seem like there was anything to gain from that. I'm curious where her reputation for being too tough comes from, do you think, in that sense? And also, how do you kind of disentangle like expectations for female politicians versus male politicians when you're talking to sources about, Vice President Harris, because it does seem like that must be an added layer of complexity.
Yeah, I mean, so the reason I know that she's tough on staff is because I've heard it from more than one former staffer and I mean current and former people who have worked for her and with her. She doesn't. So I've never heard anybody say that she yells. She doesn't throw things. I mean, we all know politicians who do that sort of thing. That's not her way. That's not her style. But I mean, we all saw her question Brett Kavanaugh and Attorney General Bill Barr and Attorney General Jeff Sessions, and you can see how tough she is. I mean, this is a person who was probably a very good prosecutor, because you can see how she cross-examines witnesses when she was in the U.S. Senate. And that's the sort of impression I got from talking with people who have worked with her, that she could be that way with staff.
Mm-hmm.
It's not yelling. It's controlling yourself, but it's also being tough. And at the same time, she had this really compassionate side to her. And I heard that from former staffers. I mean, one of them was the chief of criminal division under Kamala Harris, and a career prosecutor, pro death penalty guy, Republican until Trump drove him out of the party. But conservative guy. Handled death penalty cases, talked about how she was, at his retirement, she showed up and spent, a lot of time talking with his wife and kids, and he was quite moved by that. She didn't have to do that. But then there were other instances like that where there was a college classmate of hers in San Francisco when she was district attorney, and she was, this fellow called her, she picked up the phone and he said, there's this woman who, she was a volunteer for Kamala Harris for district attorney, was a neighbor of his. And he said, she's near death and it'd be nice if you could, write her a note. And so instead of writing her a note, Harris said, well, what are you doing now? And they agreed to meet at the nursing home where this woman was housed. And she went and spent 20 minutes holding that woman's hand and talking with her. And this didn't come out at the time. It came out during the presidential campaign when President Trump tweeted how mean and nasty Kamala Harris was, and this lawyer decided to reveal this sort of human side to Harris that he knew about. The woman died shortly after this visit, so it was just Harris, this attorney, and who knew about it, and then he made the story public. It was it's a human thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you talked about Harris's sort of inner circle in California who helped kind of plot her Senate run. Juan Rodriguez ended up running her presidential campaign. Right. Do you have a sense for how many people that have kind of Harris lifers, or maybe not lifers, but just sort of like this inner circle, made it with her to the White House?
Or them did.
Yeah, that's my sense too.
Yeah,
so,
no, I mean, it's not that she's cut off communications with them. I mean, I know that she's still in touch with some, but yeah, no, she's not. No, this is Joe Biden's administration. This is not Kamala Harris's administration, is the impression I have.
Yeah, that's what it seems like, because I was looking at all the names you were mentioning and I was like, none of these people seem to, she didn't get to bring them in, or she didn't want to bring them in. or a combination?
Yeah, no, I think that she's got she's got deep relationships with Californians who she might have brought with her. Her chief of staff in the U.S. Senate is working for her, but she's not a Californian. Yeah, I'm not aware of any Californians who have made that move with Kamala Harris. That may change in time, but I'm not aware of any right now, at least.
And how would you describe Harris and Biden's relationship?
Well, you would have a better sense of that than I would. I know California politics a little bit. I don't know much at all about Washington politics. But my feeling is that President Biden, I mean, nobody would pick Kamala Harris. Nobody would pick Kamala Harris to put her off in some corner and not talk with her, not solicit her opinions and advice. I mean, she's a strong, thoughtful, strategic thinker, agile mind. He's going to come to rely on it if he doesn't already. I mean, she's formidable, and you would not pick her as vice president if you wanted somebody just to say yes sir. That is not Kamala Harris.
Yeah. And would you be surprised to see her run for president 4 years from now? Well,
I know conventional wisdom in Washington is that Biden is a one-term president, will be a one-term president. I don't know. I don't know President Biden, met him once. I'm sure he doesn't remember me. But,
you'd be surprised. He'd at least pretend to remember you.
But he's wanted to be president for a long time, and so I mean, I don't see why he wouldn't run a second time if his health permits. I mean, he hasn't discouraged the speculation, I guess. I don't know. It's just from what I read. I have little doubt, but that she wants to be president. I mean, she ran once. I think you get that bug. I think she thinks she could be a good president. So I don't think that there's any reason why she wouldn't run. But as you know, having covered presidential campaigns, it's really hard to win the nomination. And once you win the nomination, it's really hard to win the presidency. And the electoral vote, the electoral college system is it really does favor Republicans. So it's I'm not convinced that she's going to be the 47th president of the United States. I do think that she'll run.
Okay. Well, I want to get to some of the audience questions because there's one that was actually, I was going to ask a version of this question. It's from Mark. He says, Harris is obviously a talented politician. Why was her presidential run so poorly received and equally poorly run? It is interesting to note the parallel with Biden's equally unimpressive run in 2008, ending with his selection as vice president.
Well, again, Liz, since you were on the campaign trail, you'd have a better sense of this than I would. My feeling, though, is that presidential candidates often run more than once, and it's not easy to win. But her theory of the campaign was that she had to win South Carolina, and she could never win over South Carolina voters, right? It was Biden's. Biden had really loyal support, particularly among Black voters in South Carolina, and she couldn't shake that. So her fundraising never took off, and she raised $12 million in her first quarter. It's mediocre. Think about Barack Obama in his first quarter in 2007, raised 27 million, I think the number was. So she never it just didn't take off. There were a lot of people running, a lot of really quality candidates, Elizabeth Warren for one, Bernie Sanders for another. She had a hard time figuring out where her lane was. My guess is that if she runs the second time, when she runs the second time, she'll be a better candidate. I think, I think many politicians run once for president. It's really hard to run for president. Most of them don't make it. I mean, I think about Jerry Brown. I mean, he was had a really successful run as governor the second time. Ran multiple times for president, never came close. Well, came a little bit close, maybe, but so really talented politicians just don't get the nomination. It happens. So.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I also wonder, I feel like when she entered, she was sort of in the left lane because she decided to go with Medicare for all. And it ended up that the left lane was actually really crowded with like Warren and Bernie. And then she sort of backed off of Medicare for all, I think, when she kind of realized that. And I think that added to this perception that she was wishy-washy. And I do wonder what her campaign would have looked like if she had run more like center left instead of left, and then just directly challenge Biden on his own turf. But I think you're probably right that like it's just really hard, and she wasn't going to be able to siphon off enough support from him anyway.
Well, I do think that her resume, including being a prosecutor, was would have been helpful in a general election, will be helpful in a general election if she gets there. It didn't help in the primary. When people are more primary voters tend to be, more to the left in the Democratic Party. So I guess it didn't help much that she had been a prosecutor, but so that was one of the issues, I think also.
There's two questions on her prosecutor career, actually. One from Sean. He says, there's been criticism of Vice President Harris's long career as a prosecutor, specifically the contradictory idea that she was a progressive prosecutor. This year, when police misconduct came to the forefront, this issue again resurfaced. Did she struggle to reconcile her stance against police misconduct with her years defending police on such matters?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not sure that you can say she necessarily defended police. But in California, it is district attorneys. We have 58 counties here and 58 district attorneys, and it's their job to investigate officer-involved shootings. It was when she was California Attorney General, was not the jurisdiction of the California Attorney General. Now the California Attorney General can take over jurisdiction. There was legislation when she was AG to give that authority to the AG, take it away from the district attorneys. She didn't support that. So of course you can make the argument that she could have been much more progressive on police issues, and certainly people did. People in California made that claim. I think she went as far as she thought she could go politically. One of the things that I liked as a reporter was she opened up a mass of data about in custody deaths that had never been public before. I mean, it was all public information. She just put it all on the internet. I liked that. That was an interesting move, and I do believe reporters should make more use of that. She did other things as Attorney General. Created a Bureau of Child, I forget the name of it, but to focus on crimes against children. I thought that was an important step. She was not that was a second term issue. And then of course she ran for US Senate. So she never really got to carry that out. Javier Becerra, the Health and Human Services Secretary nominated, but nominee, Biden's nominee, succeeded her as Attorney General. And he built that unit up significantly. And it's an important part of the justice system now in California.
So Anne has a question, more of a general question, which is, what made you choose to write about Kamala Harris? What was it that drew you in?
Well, she's a fascinating politician, but it was Simon and Schuster wanted a book about Kamala Harris, and there was I had done a piece about her that was timed to run when Biden announced his selection, and did a piece for the Washington Post, and the Post editor said, you know, Morain, you should really write a book about Kamala Harris. This was August 11th, and I thanked him, flattered, nah. And then a couple of weeks later, he sent me another note saying, "No, you really, really should." And I talked to my wife, and one thing led to another, and so you know, I got hired to write this biography in short order, and it's been quite a ride.
An anonymous person asks, what challenges did you face when you were researching and writing this book? And did you make any surprising discoveries?
Mm-hmm. Well, the challenge was to write a fair account of Kamala Harris without having the benefit of talking with her. So there are things that I would have loved to have known that I would have asked her about, but you know, I didn't have that opportunity. So that was the big challenge. Yeah, of course, I reached out. You know, as soon as I knew that I had this, you know, assignment of a career to put together a biography of somebody who could, you know, we didn't know obviously when I started this that they were going to win, that Biden and Harris were going to win. As soon as I knew that I had this assignment, I reached out to the Biden campaign, reached out to Kamala Harris's press person, and they were, you know, very polite and very politely said, "No way." So, you know, it's okay. And I asked them multiple times during the course of reporting. There are specific questions I had, and the same with her family. You know, one thing you will find, Liz, in covering Kamala Harris is she will answer your questions, and then if you ask her a question that she doesn't want to answer, she's really good at not answering that question. You'll find that, and she can't be badgered into answering something she doesn't want to answer. So.
And so Emily asks, I guess based on our previous conversation about Harris being careful, she says, would you consider her actions more intentional rather than not taking a stance? She seems to set goals and knows when to let her intentions be known.
Yeah, that's really very perceptive. You know, like I say, so I rethought my use of the word cautious, because you can find all kinds of examples where she was anything but cautious. I mean, she was anything but cautious when she decided to endorse Barack Obama for president, not Hillary Clinton. She was certainly not cautious when she was sitting at, I don't know, 6% in the polls in San Francisco and ran against an incumbent who was really well known, right? That was a bold move. It was bold when she ran for California Attorney General against this guy who had served 3 terms as LA DA, and the same when she ran for the US Senate. So yeah, she can do these sort of bold things. And she is very strategic. She thinks more than one step ahead. And I found that you'd see this if you read the book, that there are instances where where you can see how she is thinking more than one step ahead, and I think you kind of want that in a leader, somebody who can look around the corner a little bit.
Edith asks, would you speak about her time at Howard University in Washington, D.C. and its influence on Harris now?
Mm-hmm. Well, she Howard was I think anybody who goes to college for 4 years, it's formative. I mean, certainly my 4 years of college were formative, but hers were especially so. She had gone to high school. Her mom had been had gotten a job at McGill University, so moved up to Montreal, French speaking, and that's where she was from age 12 to I guess about 18. And then she goes to Howard. She was there 86, 7, 8, or 8, around those years, and it's really a time of great foment. She marched against apartheid. That was very much front and center. The first MLK Day was celebrated when she was there. Jesse Jackson came and spoke at Howard at that time, and Shirley Chisholm spoke. So this was incredibly formative. There are a couple of classmates who I found of hers who are still very fond of her, talk about her, talk with her. One in Washington I was just in contact with today, a fellow prosecutor, went to Howard. So yeah, it was incredibly formative, and she makes reference to it all the time, and it's part of her identity. I mean, she truly understands the weight of who she is and what she is, and where she's come. I mean, it's 2.5 miles from Howard to the White House, but it is really a long walk. Mm-hmm. It's taken more than a century to get there.
Sean has a question about Harris's family. Did you learn about her family, Doug and the kids? They seem to be a tight unit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I met Doug a couple times. He's a delightful guy, was my impression. I know people who know him. I don't know his kids. I didn't try to interview them. It seemed just a little bit far afield, but clearly there's, it's kind of an extraordinary American family, isn't it? It's his second marriage, her first. He's got the 2 grown kids, 2 adult kids, who clearly are very fond of her, and his ex-wife is part of this extended family. They're in for quite an adventure. I think it's interesting. Doug was a very accomplished lawyer in Century City, Los Angeles, entertainment lawyer, managing partner of 2 different firms. When he was there, and when he first met his wife in 2014, but there are a lot of accomplished lawyers in Century City, and he describes himself as just a dude who happened to get set up by the wife, who was a good friend of Kamala Harris, of a famous filmmaker, the couple had come to Doug Emhoff for legal advice. He gave them advice, and at the end of their session, she said, "So are you single?" And he said, "Yeah, why?" Or "Why you ask him?" She said, "Well, I've got this friend who you might like." And he wasn't clear on. He asked who it was, and the woman said, "Kamala Harris." And Doug Emhoff, it's very California. It was said, "How do I know that name?" So this is a big time lawyer in LA. who doesn't know the name of the Attorney General. She jogs his memory and says, "Oh yeah, yeah." Anyway, so they got together and got married. Anyway, it's I guess a typical LA love story, right?
This anonymous person has a good question. He or she says, I find her emotional presence in interviews so refreshing. She can laugh in responding to some wooden or loaded questions. Has she presented this quality from the beginning or gotten more comfortable with herself over time?
Yeah, she, like I say, I think she's a very good retail politician. And she's, she'd come to the Sacramento Bee editorial board, and was really adept at answering our questions or not answering our questions. But yeah, she can be incredibly charming. She was. So yes, she laughs easily. She smiles easily, readily. She's really quite engaging. That said, she took her share of lumps in the press in California, and certainly in San Francisco. And then when she got onto the statewide stage, she did again. She sort of rolled with it, is my impression.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. There were still more questions, but we got to a lot of them, which is good. Thank you so much, Dan, for sharing everything about Vice President Harris that you learned while writing this book. It was very illuminating. And thanks everybody for joining us and for your great questions.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you all for joining in. And thanks so much, Liz. And thanks to the Tewksbury Public Library and your library partners. I mean, this has just been delightful. And thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Dan. And we're going to end the call in about 10 seconds. Everyone, have a great evening. Yep. And make sure, for those who are with us live tonight, check your email tomorrow morning for that feedback survey and information on how to order Dan's book with an autograph. So thanks again, and everyone have a great night. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Dan.
Right.
Good night.